In the 10th century BC, ancient Israel reached the absolute peak of its economic and military might. Under King Solomon, a sprawling trade network brought in staggering wealth, and for the first time in generations, the kingdom's borders were entirely at peace. Solomon used that wealth to construct his crowning achievement, the first temple in Jerusalem. This massive complex of cut stone and gold was designed to be the permanent dwelling place of Yahweh, the literal intersection where heaven and earth met. By restricting all sacrifices and major festivals to this single location, Solomon instituted a system of centralized worship. Every pilgrim, every tithe, and every religious festival now flowed directly through the capital, concentrating total religious and economic control squarely in the hands of the king. With a unified populace, a booming economy, and a divine sanctuary anchoring the capital, the nation's security appeared completely untouchable. The monarchy and the priesthood were locked together, seemingly guaranteed by the stone walls of the temple itself. But that monumental architecture carried a massive human cost. To build his palaces and shrines, Solomon imposed crushing taxes and forced tens of thousands of citizens from the northern tribes into conscripted labor camps. To secure his trade routes, the king brokered hundreds of diplomatic marriages with foreign princesses. This directly violated foundational religious laws designed to keep the nation's worship exclusive. To accommodate these alliances, Solomon erected shrines to deities like Chemosh and Moloch on the hillsides, directly overlooking Jerusalem. The king's exclusive loyalty to Yahweh fractured, dividing his attention among the gods of his political allies. Concentrating absolute authority in the capital didn't protect the kingdom. Instead, the heavy taxation and religious compromises created a massive moral vacuum at the top. The crown had compromised its core values, ensuring the unified nation would eventually tear itself apart. When Solomon died in 931 BC, the bill finally came due. His son Rehoboam traveled to Shechem to take the throne, but he was immediately confronted by a delegation from the 10 northern tribes. They issued a very simple demand: lighten the oppressive taxes and the forced labor, and they would gladly serve him. Rehoboam ignored the older advisors who urged him to listen to the people. Taking the advice of his wealthy peers, he arrogantly promised to increase their burden, declaring he would discipline them with scorpions rather than whips. The response was immediate and violent. The northern tribes seceded entirely, executing Rehoboam's labor enforcer and shattering the unified superpower into 2 warring states. Rehoboam was left clinging to the southern kingdom of Judah, which retained Jerusalem and the temple. Meanwhile, the rebel leader Jeroboam took control of the newly formed northern kingdom of Israel, capturing the vast majority of the landmass, the population, and the agricultural wealth. In just 3 days, the unified regional power was gone. 2 diminished kingdoms were left to face the rising empires of the East, no longer as a single wall, but as rival neighbors. Now in power, Jeroboam faced a massive strategic problem. The only legitimate temple was still located in Jerusalem, deep inside enemy territory. If his citizens continued migrating south for religious festivals, their loyalties would eventually shift back to the Davidic crown, and they would assassinate him. To cut off the pilgrimage routes, Jeroboam calculated a new religious strategy. He established 2 alternative state sanctuaries, one at Bethel near his southern border, and one at Dan in the extreme north, to intercept his people before they could leave. Inside these sanctuaries, he installed golden calves. He announced to the people that it was too difficult to travel all the way to Jerusalem, and that these were the actual gods who brought them out of Egypt, a deliberate callback to the nation's oldest idolatries. The king had successfully engineered a religion specifically for border control. By manipulating faith to preserve his own political survival, the new state proved it was just as corrupt as the one it had rebelled against. Over the next century, the kings of the north grew increasingly ruthless, culminating in the reign of King Ahab and his Phoenician queen, Jezebel. Together, they attempted to systematically wipe out the worship of Yahweh entirely, replacing it with a violent, state-sponsored cult of the storm god, Baal. In response to this total royal overreach, a radical resistance movement emerged, the Prophets. Operating largely outside the state apparatus, they acted as a fierce system of checks and balances, risking execution to hold the crown accountable to the ancient laws. The conflict came to a head when Ahab planned a military campaign to retake a border city. He summoned 400 state-salaried court prophets who performed for the king and unanimously guaranteed a glorious military victory. But Ahab's visiting ally from the south was suspicious of this forced consensus and demanded an independent voice. Reluctantly, Ahab summoned a rogue prophet named Micaiah, a man Ahab openly despised because Micaiah refused to flatter the crown. Micaiah delivered a devastating verdict. He described a vision of the heavenly court, where God intentionally permitted a lying spirit to inhabit the mouths of Ahab's 400 court prophets. The unanimous advice Ahab loved was a divine trap designed to lead the king to his death. The royal court exploded. The leader of the state prophets struck Micaiah across the face. Furious, King Ahab ordered Micaiah to be thrown into a dungeon and fed only bread and water of affliction until he returned victorious. By silencing Micaiah, Ahab removed the last barrier to his own destruction. The court's unanimous applause had become his greatest vulnerability, leaving only the prisoner in the dungeon holding the truth of what was actually coming. Despite his bluster, Ahab was terrified by Micaiah's warning. To cheat the prophecy, he cowardly stripped off his royal robes and disguised himself as a regular infantryman before marching into the battle at Ramoth-Gilead. But the evasion failed. In the chaos of the fighting, an enemy soldier drew his bow at random and fired into the melee. The arrow perfectly found the tiny gap between the joints of Ahab's armor. As the sun set, the king slowly bled to death in the back of his chariot. Word spread, and the Israelite army scattered across the hills, exactly like sheep without a shepherd, just as Micaiah had predicted. The 400 state-sponsored voices were silenced by a single random arrow. When political institutions rot from the inside out, true authority no longer resides on a throne or in a centralized temple. It lives in the fearless, uncompromising truth of the prophetic word.